Good morning. This is Dina Marie of Faith Moments with a Franciscan moment on Mater Dei Radio. Plagues, popes, and politics surrounded the intriguing life of one mystic, virgin, and doctor of the church named Saint Catherine of Siena. With me today to discuss one of the most influential women saints in church history is Franciscan Friar Father Dan Pattee. Father Dan, thanks for coming back. Happy Easter. It's great to have you with us today.
Thank you, Dina Marie. Good to be with you too, and happy Easter. And Christ is risen.
He is risen indeed. Absolutely. I think about the Easter season and I think, all of these saints that we talk about also celebrated the Easter season, right? The resurrection of Christ. And what I've also learned, Father Dan, as we've talked about saints, is saints beget saints. It's like there are saints among the saints. Saint Francis and Saint Clare, they lived together. They influenced one another. They supported one another in their vocations. And today we recognize them in the church as saints. But today I want to explore Saint Catherine of Siena. In April 29th is her feast day. You mentioned earlier, the last time we talked, that you recently read a little bit more about her life. Give us a sense of when St. Catherine of Siena lived, a little bit about her childhood, what we know about her.
Well, Saint Catherine of Siena, she was born in Siena, which is in the region of Tuscany in Italy, in 1347. So she would have been the 14th century, and she lived 33 years, the same number of years as our Lord himself, dying in 1360. And of course, she was the last of 25 children born into a family. Now, many of her siblings didn't make it through childhood. Some of them died and passed away, but she managed to live, and 25 children, though, that's a sizable family.
Yeah, it's amazing. And I also understand she's a twin. She's known
Yes.
as a twin. What do we know about her childhood in terms of her love of the faith, her love of Christ, her prayer life? Just kind of growing up, it seems like she had a huge connection with Christ and wanted to give all to be a bride of Christ.
Yeah, she really did, and even did some radical things to secure that. For example, her mother was concerned for her as she got to be 11, 12 years old, and she was very concerned that she care for her looks more, because she wanted her daughter to become eventually married and the like. And Catherine ended up cutting all her hair off and insisted, I don't want to get married. I want to live and she started to live this kind of reclusive life in her own home. And her father protected her. And so she was permitted to continue to live that way. So her relationship with Christ began very early, to the point where she was 16 years old in 1563, when she actually enrolled in the Dominican tertiaries, the penitents of Saint Dominic in Siena. She became a member of them already at the age of 16. And by then, of course, she was well on her way in this very unusual mystical experiences of Christ that she had in her life.
Mm-hmm. Father Dan, when St. Catherine of Siena connected with the Dominican order as a third order, how did that seem to influence her life, her maybe charisms, or how she approached prayer and Christ?
Well, I think the biggest influence it had on her, in particular, see, one of the things about Catherine, she was very reclusive in the beginning of her life while living at home, doing penance, fasting an awful lot already at a young age. In fact, I've read a couple of articles about her that even suggest she may have had an eating disorder. So this saint actually sanctified an eating disorder that eventually became a great source of union with Christ as well. Um, and she actually, when she then finally joined the Dominicans, she began to step out of the home and care for the poor locally, as the penitents of St. Dominic did. I mean, there were other members of the tertiaries there in Siena, and that's what they did. They did works of mercy, and she began to step out, care for the poor. She would make bread at home and give it out to the poor, for example. She began to actually bake her own bread in her mother's kitchen, and um, very often even use her mother's ingredients, and the stuff that was supposed to be used for the family. And the father protected her and said, that's fine. You keep doing that. And she would do that, and she'd take the bread out to the poor. And so the tertiaries helped her begin to step out of the home into, like, what really launched her into this very unusual public life in the church, as we'll talk about as well.
Right. Well, we know Saint Catherine of Siena from a lot of her writings, but I understand she didn't. I mean, the Dominicans had to help her with writing, with just being able to grow in that particular gift. And then she started to do quite a bit of writing, and it connected with popes and politics. How did that all come together with the history of when she lived? And at some point, we did have three popes claiming to be popes in the Catholic Church.
Yes, I mean, well, there's so much there, Dina Marie, that you're talking about. For example, Catherine never really learned how to read, but our Lord infused that talent into her, and so and she never really did learn how to write. So a lot of what happened was, when she would be in mystic ecstasy, for example, she would dictate. She had these secretaries who would take down her writings. So, for example, her most famous writing, the dialogues, that's how they were written down. Were her being able, she would be in ecstasy and she would dictate this dialogue that she was having with the Father or with Christ. And these secretaries were all there writing this down, and serving her in that way. And I often like to say this because Catherine of Siena, she was declared a doctor of the church in 1970. And this is a woman, I mean, I have a PhD in theology, and I worked about 6 years just to get that. And Catherine of Siena received by infusion a superior knowledge to what I worked hard to gain over 6 years. She just had this tremendous insight into theology. And of course, many theologians wanted to talk with her as a result of that at the time. And she's a doctor of the church, and I'm kind of here slopping along after working so hard. And that's what our Lord did with her, is a great deal of infused kind of knowledge that she received in mystical visions. Very gifted woman in prayer with Christ.
Mm-hmm. Father Dan Pattee is with us, Franciscan Friar, speaking about the life of Saint Catherine of Siena. In April, we recognize her in the church calendar on the 29th. Several things we recognize her: the patron saint of Europe, Italy, also nurses, as you mentioned, because she cared for the sick, and also for invoking against fires and temptations. So we can really call St. Catherine of Siena in many cases. Who are some of the key people in her life as we look at the different influences that she would have had, other saints and other holy people?
Well, I think one of the most influential, for her at least, was her spiritual director, who was a Dominican priest, Raymond of Capua, who also wrote you might say, the Acts. We have the Acts of the Apostles in the Bible, the deeds of the apostles. Well, he kind of wrote sort of an Acts of Saint Catherine, that eventually did contribute to her being canonized in 1461. And so he probably would have been one of the more influential. But I think anyone that got to know her, it went the other way too. I mean, she was a strong woman. She really was an incredible woman of God who, I remember one time, for example, Raymond of Capua, I believe it was, he had just been made elected to some position in the Dominicans, and he was reluctant, and he stood with her as he had to get on the boat to go over to assume this position. She said, take it like a man, and kind of just really kind of tried to help him get some spine into the job, and she, Mother Teresa of Calcutta, this lowly saint, she could be the same way sometimes, just really a strong woman. And that's Catherine of Siena as well.
Right. Father Dan, I want to talk with you more about some of the mystical experiences that St. Catherine had and some of her connection with St. Francis, but we're coming up to a break. Stay with me and we'll continue our conversation in the next half hour.
Okay, thanks, Dina Marie.